Good morning. Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Julia Fogel, the worship associate today, and I will be assisted by June Bailey. Our worship musician this morning is Tim McKnight, and our song leader is Suzanne Delzio. Our tech team is David O'Gwyn and Dean Gadet. And I have passed a rapid test this morning, so you will see me leading worship without my mask on, as has June as well. Our minister, Reverend Sharon Wiley, will return to the pulpit next Sunday. So welcome to today's worship service. Welcome to those of you here in the chapel, and welcome to those of you on Zoom. For those of us here in the chapel, you'll notice that we have the back door open. This and the 4 air purifiers in the room will help to keep our air circulating. Please feel free to leave the chapel at any time if you are uncomfortable for any reason. You'll be able to hear what is happening in the chapel while you are outside on the courtyard. For those of you using Zoom, please notice the chat button on your Zoom menu. You are welcome to use the chat box during the service. Just be sure that when you post, you've opened the little blue menu to select everyone, so all can see what's being shared. I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice this morning. Towards the end of the service, there will be a link in the online chat box for adding your name to our email list. In-person newcomers have already provided your email when you signed in. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about the many groups and activities we offer here at Chalice. Now, let's take a breath together.
Good morning. According to the Library of Congress, the first permanent Euro-American settlements began a pattern of displacement and land appropriation of indigenous people that continued until the 20th century. In this region that we consider home, the Kumeyaay first lived here for over 10,000 years and were the people who greeted the Spanish when they first sailed into the San Diego harbor in 1542. With this awareness, we acknowledge that Chalice is located on the stolen, tribal, ancestral homeland of the Apai, which is part of the Kumeyaay Nation, and the Payamkawichem Nation. This acknowledgement reminds us that we live in a history-driven present and that we need to be intentional with this land and with the people indigenous to the land. Mary Lyons from the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe states, "When we, the indigenous people, talk about land, land is part of who we are. It is a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future." According to the research done with Reclaiming Native Truth, 40% of Americans do not believe that indigenous people still exist in the U.S. Chalice hopes that with our first step of land acknowledgement, we can move towards educating ourselves and others about indigenous communities and their rich and diverse culture and create a meaningful relationship with them as well.
Now we light our chalice the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. I'd like to invite June Bailey to light our chalice this morning. Our chalice lighting words are adapted from words by Elizabeth Harding. We Unitarian Universalists don't drink from our chalice. Instead, we use it to hold the flame. The circle of the chalice helps keep the fire small. The flame doesn't blind us. It doesn't burn us. It gives us light. It reminds us to look for all the different things in the universe, even the invisible ones. Our Unitarian Universalist flame is a light of learning and love.
Today is the 8th in our series of spotlights on Black composers. Previous spotlights included Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Florence Price, Scott Joplin, Nathaniel Dett, Margaret Bonds, William Grant Still, and Joseph Boulogne. These composers' lifetimes spanned the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Today, however, marks the first time that we will spotlight a living composer. That composer is Valerie Capers, an American pianist, composer, and educator who was born in Bronx, New York on May 24, 1935. Capers was born into a musical family, including her father, who was a professional jazz pianist and a friend of Fats Waller. Capers has been blind since the age of 6, when an illness deprived her of her sight. Her early schooling took place at the New York Institute for the Education of the Blind, where she studied classical piano. It was there that Capers learned to read Braille music notation, like what you see here. This is how she would learn and memorize all of her piano pieces. She continued her musical studies at the Juilliard School of Music, where she obtained her bachelor's and master's degrees. She was the first blind graduate of the Juilliard School. After graduating from Juilliard in 1960, Capers was encouraged by her brother Bobby to study jazz. He also encouraged Valerie to try her hand at composing. So Valerie decided to take some time off from playing classical music in order to learn jazz. She formed her own jazz trio and in 1966 recorded her first jazz album, Portrait in Soul. Following her brother Bobby's death in 1974, Capers composed the 2-hour Christmas cantata Sing About Love, which incorporates elements from jazz, gospel, blues, and classical idioms. Other significant works by Capers include Song of the Seasons, a song cycle largely composed in the classical style, and Sojourner, an operatoriо about the life of Sojourner Truth. The term operatoriо was coined by Capers to describe a combination of opera and oratorio. Capers has also composed art songs, orchestral music, and a suite of 12 piano solo pieces entitled Portraits in Jazz. You'll be hearing several movements of this work during today's service, including a very special performance by the composer herself. In addition to her performing and composing talents, Capers was an innovative and passionate educator. However, in the 1960s, she found it difficult to find teaching jobs because many institutions were unwilling to hire a blind person. She eventually was hired at the Bronx Neighborhood Music School and the Brooklyn School of Music. From 1968 to 1975, she worked at the Manhattan School of Music, where she was an advisor to blind students and developed a jazz curriculum. From 1987 to 1995, Capers was the chair of the Bronx Community College Department of Music and Art, where she is now Professor Emeritus. Valerie Capers was the first recipient of Essence Magazine's Women of Essence Award. where she would be in the elite company of fellow honorees Oprah Winfrey and Marla Gibbs. She has been recognized by the Bronx Music Heritage Center as a Bronx living legend for her, quote, enduring legacy to the American jazz tradition, unquote. In fall 2015, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio appointed her to the city's prestigious Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission. Capers has appeared with her trio and ensemble at colleges, universities, jazz festivals, clubs, and concert halls throughout the country, as well as internationally. Throughout her career, she has performed with an impressive roster of outstanding artists, including Dizzy Gillespie, Wynton Marsalis, Tito Puente, Max Roach, James Moody, Branford Marsalis, and many others. She remains very active in her life's work to this very day.
The words of our call to worship come from Karen G. Johnston. Do not be alone right now. Gather together. Gathering together grows courage in ourselves and in others who see the numbers swelling. It is a small thing, but right now it is an important thing. Great sources of wisdom remind us, just because you cannot stem the tide of all hate, it is still the right to do the things you can do. These things add up. Your one thing, my one thing, his one thing, their one thing, and her one thing. Together it becomes a big thing. Do not be alone right now. Any liberation, all liberation, is collective liberation. My freedom is bound with yours and yours with mine, inextricably. Let us cast our lots together doing this big thing, bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. Please rise in body or spirit to join in singing. Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by sharing and honoring our joys and sorrows. Here in the chapel, you are welcome to write your joy or sorrow onto a candle card, which will be collected. Online, please write your joy or sorrow, including your name, into the chat box. These joys and sorrows will be spoken out loud, and then we will remove this part of the service from the recording that goes into our YouTube channel. So sharing this won't be publicly available online. We will have a few minutes of music so you can write down what you would like to share. If you would like to send Reverend Sharon a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, or to make a prayer request, please email her. Her email address will be on the screen in a moment.
You Matter, written and illustrated by Christian Robinson. The small stuff too small to see. Those who swim with the tide and those who don't. The first to go and the last. You matter. When everyone thinks you're a pest. When something is just out of reach. When everyone is too busy to help. You matter. If you fall down. If you have to start all over again. Even if you are really gassy, you matter. Sometimes home is far away. Sometimes someone you love says goodbye. Sometimes you feel lost and alone, but you matter. Old and young, the first to go and the last. The small stuff too small to see. You matter.
Each year, Reverend Sharon picks a topic for us to study deeply over the course of the church year, called our Spirit Study topic. The main expression of our Spirit Study is a series of 10 sermons, one per month, beginning in September and going through June. During the course of our anti-racism work over the past few years, we have heard again and again to center the voices and experiences of marginalized peoples, and for white people to do less talking and more listening. Reverend Sharon started to think about how great it would be for us to listen to some of our Black UU preachers, especially now that using video has opened us up to be able to hear from people who are outside our local area. So we've invited 10 UU preachers to preach for us over the course of 10 months, one service a month, and they are invited to preach on any topic of their choosing. Today is our 9th sermon in the series. This morning we welcome Reverend Adam Lawrence Dyer. He is the lead minister at First Parish in Cambridge Unitarian Universalist, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Unitarian Universalist Chaplain at Howard University. He is the author of Love Beyond God, a collection of poetry and reflections focused on Black identity and liberal religion. He has been featured in UU World magazine. Reverend Dyer's blog, spirityouwellness.org, explores the relationship between bodies, faith, and politics. This blog has been online on Medium, Believe Out Loud, Equity Blog, and the Good Men Project. Reverend Dyer contributed to the recently published collection of essays from Vanderbilt University Press called Body Battlegrounds, Transgressions, Tensions, and Transformations. Previously, Reverend Dyer worked with Policy Link and the California Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, the PICO Networks, and the UU Justice Ministry of California, advocating for LGBTQ, gender, racial, economic, religious, and health equity. He is a graduate of Princeton University and the Pacific School of Religion. And now, Reverend Dyer.
Orphaned in history. I struggle with history. The flickering yellowed images, the faded pages, the fond memories, nostalgia, the Ken Burns pan and scan of faces, documentary after documentary, are not what I am looking for. These images are more distant, more removed, disconnected from me by handlebar mustaches and porcelain skin. These recollections, this fondness for painting the past, does not even know I existed, except for slavery and the Reverend Dr. King. And so, this history is their story. It does not belong to me. I did not tell it. I did not write it. I do not own it. I do not want it. Who will tell my story? Beyond the color lines, beyond the lunch counters, beyond the chains of slavery and jails. Who will tell stories older than 2 millennia of kings and goddesses, legends and legacies that blend and bend in a portrait that traces my profile and tinges my brow? Who will tell my story? When and how? I wonder what it's like to never experience the weight of racism in the world, to have the lightness, literally and figuratively, to experience the world without the lingering doubt of your own legitimacy in everything you do, to be able to watch the news without anticipating an internalized defense against a personal responsibility for crime rates, or bracing for another image of yourself or someone you could know being murdered. To walk down a street with no sense that you could ever be stopped by police who question your place, or a child who will question the permanence of your skin color. To apply for a job without ever having it cross your mind that you might either get it or not, based solely on biology and not on your skill set. To get coffee at a shop without waiting to be waited on last, ignored, or addressed as bro. I wonder these things because the experiencing that I'm outlining is what I live every day in the 21st century in the most liberal part of the most liberal country on earth, according to some. I live this experience knowing exactly where it comes from and how many people didn't survive it before me. That knowledge is in my DNA. It is instinctive as blinking or breath. I know it comes from the project of using my ancestors as tools for creating wealth that they didn't and couldn't own, like screwdrivers or a wedge. And once they were worn out, they were discarded. It is knowledge, not history. It is present and current and alive in my hands and in my face. If it were history, I wouldn't have to live it present tense. To relegate it to history assumes distance. I have no distance from being seen as the other, even in this moment. I have no need to reckon with racism because it lives with me as an unearned potential in how a white world chooses to use its unearned agency on me. The lived experience of racial marginalization and isolation is not relegated to history for me because I still live the potential for every time someone chooses to use the N-word at me, like a knife or a bludgeon, whenever they choose, in broad daylight, in public. Funny, it's always been in broad daylight in public. When I was a 9-year-old out with my family on a drive, when I was a 10-year-old crossing guard, when I was a 20-year-old college student singing at an exclusive country club, when I was a 30-year-old actor in an agent's office, as a 40-year-old cruise director, as a 50-year-old walking down the street after Trump was elected, in broad daylight, in public. The white people who have used this weapon at me have permission to use it, with no repercussions beyond what I might personally choose to do. Rarely does a bystander intervene, none has ever in my experience, because it's all about individual racists, not a system of entitlement to racism, right? Yes, this is entirely individual after individual, not a blanket cultural empowerment acted on for defense, for pleasure, for haughtiness, for hatred. Yes, the rights of the individual are more important than the collective harm. And therein lies the problem with reckoning. Reckoning is something designed for collective action. Reckoning is a group response. But time and time again, the ethical and legal offspring of the colonial world only wants to hold individuals to account. When a group of inflamed white men march and chant, "Jews will not replace us," creating a gathering that leads to death, the first impulse of our systems of accountability is to deal with them as individuals, because they are only responsible on an individual basis. When an angry mob storms the Capitol, causing destruction and death and permanent historical trauma, they are brought before the law as individuals, and their individual acts are assessed for the individual harm they have caused. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was only signed this year, long after some 4,000 black, brown, and marginalized people were killed for sport and entertainment and vigilante justice over the course of nearly 200 years by mostly white mobs. From the earliest iterations, anti-lynching legislation championed by black scholar Ida B. Wells in the early 1900s, and later taken up by Congressman Lawrence Dyer, no relation to me, was resisted because of its impact on individual rights. Senator Rand Paul was the last to raise this objection only a little over a year ago. But it is angry mobs that cause the harm. It is groups that cause the harm. Reckoning is and must be a group exercise. Harvard University released its report on the institution's history of involvement in slavery and native erasure a few weeks ago. This report contains damning information, including the fact that Harvard continues to keep in its archives the human remains of several enslaved people who were used for experimentation. The report includes the names of professors, donors, and students who were involved in the slave trade. The report traces the breadcrumbs to expose the ways in which Harvard was literally built on funding from the slave trade. And the history is not limited to just slavery and African-descended people. In fact, the story to some degree starts with slavery, but it also includes the broken promises of education to Native people, their enslavement, and their murder and removal from the location we today call Cambridge, Massachusetts. The history includes the expulsion and barring of black students well after the fall of slavery, and policies that contributed to making Harvard what it became by the end of the 20th century, the largest, most powerful, and wealthiest research institution in the world. The report speaks of Harvard's intention to partner with historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, to find reparative actions. President Larry Bacow has pledged to direct $100 million toward these efforts and more. But for all of the good intentions and money and research and inclusion in this effort, Harvard will not name itself as what it is: a historically white college and university, an HWCU. Why? Because of the ongoing resistance, even among the most liberal and progressive of dominant culture scholars and advocates, to recognize themselves as part of a group. Harvard approaches this effort of reckoning as a standalone, only able to address its own issues and its singular role. But reckoning is a group exercise. This week, the Interior Department released its report on Indian schools that were created and run in this country between the early 19th century and well into the late 20th century. Their specific purpose was to re-educate Native people, to assimilate them into white culture. In these schools, if you want to call them that, language was suppressed, spiritual foundations were vilified, ways of being in the world were reprogrammed, and people, children, died. This effort was funded by the U.S. government and run largely by religious institutions. The Unitarian Church ran one of these schools in the late 19th century in Montana. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland vowed, after the discovery of thousands of unmarked graves of Native children in Canada, to unearth the truth about Indian schools in the United States. Her impulse comes from a professional duty and an intimately personal connection to her own family history that includes people who were re-educated in these systems of cultural torture. As the first Native person to be head of this federal department, she has had the power to make this research happen, and it has involved the cooperation and sense of urgency of multiple Native organizations, tribes, gatherings, and people. It has been a group exercise. But Secretary Haaland and Native people are not the ones who must have a reckoning with the crimes that happened in Indian country. They carry the trauma of the crimes in their blood. The reckoning should really happen with all of the religious institutions, including Unitarian Universalists and local governments and others who had and gained power and often land from this horror. There is a place for a collective act of atonement. But the impulse is once again to look at individual churches, individual leaders, individual people who are long dead. Unitarian Universalists are very invested in finding a way to deal with our own role. But to my knowledge, we are not in conversation with the Catholic Church or Presbyterians. We will only deal with our individual role. Reckoning is a group exercise. What is reckoning? So for this black man who is grouped into the frame of anti-blackness by his hair and other physical features, whether he wants to be or not, reckoning with racism, specifically anti-blackness and native erasure, begins with a better definition of whiteness. A definition that doesn't so quickly slip out of grasp and fall into the pot of hand-wringing and personal shame. It also doesn't pivot in the blink of an eye to the bright side. A better definition of whiteness intentionally stops being the water in which we swim. It stops making assumptions about communication, social structure, governance, and everything else that was designed by and for the literal conquering of the non-white world. A better definition of whiteness acknowledges itself as a group, not a monolith, but a clearly defined and diversified group that benefits from what it means to be included in that group, or to have access to that group, or even just proximity to that group. A better definition of whiteness embraces the fact that reckoning is a group exercise, and remembers that repentance and redemption are the individual acts. It is our job as spiritual people to call ourselves into community. We do this through ritual and practice. We make space for affinity with our UU circles. We have the tools to make this exploration and contribute to this new definition. If Unitarian Universalism truly wants a place in a modern and evolving world where religion is increasingly challenged to find its relevant place, we may want to take up this task. One look at the Harvard history, and you immediately see Unitarians. In fact, many of the slaveholders were members of my church, First Parish in Cambridge. Enslaved people are buried outside of my office window. Our church building was designed in 1833 with a balcony so that the students and the servants, aka slaves, would have a place to also hear the word. We, Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists were and are directly complicit in literally creating the racism that we say we so desperately want to eradicate from the world. But doing so will not happen by only approaching the individual accountabilities. Reckoning is a group exercise, and it is time for Unitarian Universalists to accept group responsibility to make a real difference. I wonder what it is like to never experience the weight of racism in the world. Blessed be.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet, run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while for I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes our congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, generosity is an activity that loosens us up. by offering whatever we can, a dollar, a flower, a word of encouragement. We are training in letting go. Please text your donation to Chalice. If you haven't texted a donation before, know that once you text the amount, you'll get a reply with a link to follow to enter your credit card information. If you have already entered this information previously when you've donated, you won't need to enter it again. If your Sunday donation is meant to be part of your pledge payment, please be sure to indicate pledge after the dollar amount. The phone number for text donations will be on the screen in a moment. Please give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. At Chalice UU congregation, our mission is to connect through worship, music, learning, and caring ministries.
A song just for you. If only you knew how much you touched our hearts and were a part of music so strong. It still lingers on and on and on and on and on, singing from your soul. Your story you told as time moves along. Your voice, it's still strong. You left with no regrets, and we will not soon forget you. And a song just for you. showed us the way. Lady, you
Please join in a spirit of reflection as I read this adaptation of Prayer to Understand Others. May I understand the feelings of others, the desires of others, the goals of others. At the same time, may I understand myself in my actions and reactions. May my vision widen beyond my own small world to embrace with knowledge and love the worlds of others. May I find insight, acceptance, and love to aid my understanding. You are invited to join in singing.
I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. My way to the freedom land. I'm on my way. Thank God I'm on my way. I'm on my sister. Come and go with me. I asked my sister, come and go with me. I asked my sister, come and go with me. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. No, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way.
Before we close this service, I'd like to remind newcomers online to please use the link in the chat box to add your name to our email list. Our closing words come from Eric Williams. Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace. You are invited to close our time together by singing the well. After our closing hymn, please return to your seats for an announcement. I'd like to have Ann McKiernan come up. She has an announcement for us this morning.